Recently, Minecraft just saw the release of the 1.21.9 drop, the Copper Age. So far, I would say it's my favorite of the drops, as it added a lot of fantastic features like the copper golem, shelves, and a ton of new copper building blocks. But with so many features, some are bound to be worse than others. But I already did the ranking video, we're not talking about that. Some of the features that I and many others were less excited about were the brand new copper armor and tools. That's because they're weaker than iron armor and tools by a significant amount, so most of us are probably never going to use the feature. A lot of people even went as far as to say that these features are completely useless. Now in my opinion, that's going a bit far. Yeah, they're definitely some of the weaker new additions for the update, but players can still obviously get use out of them. They can help you save on iron in the early game, for example, by giving you some temporary armor. Now I don't think I'll ever face that issue, I'm just simply too rich, but newer players definitely will. But that got me thinking, if I don't consider copper armor useless, what item is useless? Minecraft has hundreds of items with varying uses. While materials like iron and wood are clearly near the top of usefulness, there has to be some items at the very bottom. So today, I thought it'd be fun to see if I could try and find the most useless item in all of Minecraft. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right in. So first we have to define our guidelines for how we're judging these items, as that will affect how useful something is. For starters, this is for a standard survival world, so this has to be obtainable in survival mode. Sorry for everyone who bet on the bat spawn egg. From there, we have to consider all of the different ways something could possibly be used. If it can be used in a crafting recipe, that's a use. If it can be used to decorate a build, that's a use. Even if it's as small as playing some creepypasta noises, that's a use. There are many different ways to play Minecraft, so even if the use may seem niche, it needs to be considered. Another element of something being useful is practicality. Many items in the game share similar uses with other items. Take the two golden apples for example. Both are good food sources, but the enchanted golden apple is obviously better as it gives better potion effects. However, since the normal golden apple is much easier to obtain due to having a crafting recipe, both have their place in the game. If we were to switch which one had the crafting recipe though, that would make the normal golden apple a whole lot less useful, since the enchanted golden apple is both easier to obtain and better. So if a situation arises where one item completely outclasses another in terms of how easy it is to obtain and its functionality, then that other item could be considered the most useless. The last thing that I want to note is that this question is quite complicated and there are a few different items I could understand being the answer. So the format for this video will be me going through a list of items that I could potentially see someone arguing for being the most useless. I'll state why I disagree for each one before getting to my ultimate answer at the end of the video. That way, if you disagree with my final answer, that's totally fine because you're just wrong. Alright, what better way to start this list of items out with the one famous for being useless, the poisonous potato. More than any other item in this video, this one has been joked about being completely worthless ever since it was added back in 1.4. It has been joked about so much that there was even a whole April Fool's update dedicated to it. Mojang, please, I'm begging you, bring back the potato grapple. Obviously that stuff doesn't count for the sake of this video though, so what can the poisonous potato actually do in the game? Well, it's basically just a really bad food source. If you eat it, you'll only get 2 hunger points back, and you have a 60% chance of being poisoned. It can't be crafted into anything, can't be planted, and heck, it can't even be composted. Yeah, that all sounds pretty terrible, so how could it not be seen as the most useless item in the game? Well, even if it's a bad food item, it is a food item. That means in the right scenario, you could find a use for this, which is largely thanks to how you obtain it. You can get the poisonous potato randomly from breaking potato crops or in shipwreck chests. While you would likely prefer to get a normal potato, you can still hold on to the poisonous one. If you decide to go on a long trip and somehow drain all of your food sources, you could use the poisonous potato as a last resort. In fact, if you don't get poisoned, the poisonous potato is actually better than an uncooked potato food-wise, as that only gives you 1 hunger point. Now yes, it is a super niche scenario to imagine that someone would get left stranded with poisonous potatoes they found in a shipwreck as their only food source. But when we're scraping the bottom of the barrel like this, any use can disqualify it from the running of the most useless item. The normal potato does not completely outclass the poisonous potato, since there are scenarios in survival mode where you could end up with a poison variant due to simply finding it instead. And if that wasn't enough, eating a poisonous potato is a requirement for the balanced diet advancement, which has you eat every food in the game. I wasn't sure whether or not to count this for the video, but since people like to advancement hunt, I figure it's worth mentioning as a use. Also, yes, this entire video is going to be a massive actually for every item I talk about, so be ready. Alright, with the big meme item out of the way, I want to take a look at another one that I decided to include purely for its joke status. One of the most common complaints I hear about the game is that Mojang has still not given a use for the fletching table. well. Now I want to make it clear that just because an item is useless, I don't necessarily think that's a flaw with the game. Not everything needs to be used all the time, and it's kind of fun to have some more silly items like the poisonous potato. With that being said, the fletching table definitely feels pretty lacking, and it's the only item in this video that I feel like should get updated. Almost every villager workstation has a use when placed down. Even if they didn't get it when they were first added, like the smithing table, they did eventually get a functionality later down the line. The fletching table though still remains completely unusable. With that being said, I did mention it's a villager workstation. Placing one of these next to a villager allows you to turn them into a fletcher, which by itself is already an obvious use for the table, but a fletcher is also one of the better villagers early game. Due to him allowing you to trade 32 sticks for an emerald, it's a pretty great choice to trade with. I know that I personally always get a fletcher first, which is a pretty good point for the fletching table. So even if the fletching table is a disappointment by itself, its villager use clearly saves it from truly being in the running for the most useless item. Again, I really only included it here because it's been so heavily criticized. But with us bringing up the fletching table, I want to bring up a pretty important factor for this entire video. Even if we discount all of its villager functionality, the fletching table is a block that you can place down. One of the primary appeals for Minecraft is building. Whether in creative mode or survival mode, you're going to be building a lot. That means that simply being able to be placed down is a pretty great use. I know a lot of people try to make Minecraft all about progression or whatever, but that's really not what most people are doing with the game. A large chunk of the blocks don't help you progress in any way, but calling them useless would be pretty stupid since they're clearly meant for decoration. Looking at you, calcite haters. While you can't use the fletching table yourself, you could easily use it in a build relating to a fletcher. Even the game's ugliest blocks can find a use in the hands of a talented builder. Add on that even minor texture tweaks can go a long way in adding details to builds, and you're gonna have a tough time justifying any placeable block or item as the most useless. But what if its texture wasn't tweaked? I started this video by talking about the Copper Age, and while I don't think the armor, tools, or heck even the horse armor qualify for this list, there are some hidden additions that I could see an argument for. The main gimmick for all of the copper building blocks is that they can oxidize over time. There are 4 different stages, and each can be quite helpful for detailing builds with the right color, but sometimes it just goes too far. Luckily, Mojang added the ability to wax copper, which is done by clicking it with the honeycomb. Every type of copper block has a waxed variant, which counts as a different item, despite looking the exact same. That's very fun to deal with in creative mode. But then you might be asking, what's the point of having a waxed version of a fully oxidized block? There's nowhere else for it to go, so getting a waxed version is just a waste of a honeycomb. That's why I think the wax oxidized copper family of blocks belongs in this video, as most of the time it is just a waste of honey. However, notice that I said most of the time. Lightning is actually able to deoxidize copper, but if it's waxed, the lightning won't do anything. So the only reason to ever waste honeycombs here is in the rare scenario where the fully oxidized copper on your build gets struck by lightning. Personally, I think that makes these the most niche building blocks in the game, since usually you could just use the not waxed version. But I do think that the use of preventing lightning damage is enough to stop them from taking the bottom spot. That's also on top of the trowel chamber spawning with wax oxidized copper, chiseled copper, cut copper stairs, cut copper slabs, copper doors, copper trapdoors, and copper grates. Since mining the blocks in the trowel chamber is an extremely easy way to get a lot of them, many times the wax versions are actually slightly easier to obtain. So really, if we want to be technical about it, the only blocks that I would consider more useless waxed would be the ones you can't get from the trowel chamber materials. That would be wax oxidized copper bars, chains, lanterns, chests, golem statues, and lightning rods. I'd eliminate the lightning rods from the list though, since they specifically summon lightning to them, so they make a lot more sense to be waxed. Again though, going out of your way to use honey on these guys isn't purely useless due to lightning. I just think of the wax oxidized copper blocks, these are at the bottom of the barrel since you can't get them pre-waxed from trial chambers. Also, while making this, I found out that for some reason using a waxed block when summoning a golem doesn't keep the chest waxed. Don't get scammed out there. And you know what, while we're on the topic of honeycombs, I want to talk about a feature that doesn't qualify for this video, but I did want to bring it up. So you all may be surprised to hear this, but copper is not the only blocks you can wax. In addition to all of the copper blocks, you can also wax signs. Now signs obviously don't oxidize, so what's the point of doing this? Well, in Minecraft 1.20, signs were given the ability to be edited. All you have to do is right click the sign and you can reopen the text menu. This was a super appreciated change as it made signs so much less tedious to work with, and even added the ability to have text on the back of signs as well. Then when you're all done with the text, you could put wax on it to prevent it from being edited. You could also just not edit the sign. Yeah, I genuinely don't know why this was implemented, and maybe there is a reason I'm missing, so feel free to comment, but this seems entirely pointless. Yeah, I guess in multiplayer it would stop people from being able to do anything. signs can still be destroyed and replaced if they're waxed, so I don't really get this feature. It doesn't really stop griefing at all and is just a waste of a honeycomb. Since waxed signs are not a separate item you could obtain in survival, this doesn't technically qualify for this video, but if they were, this honestly might have been my choice for the most useless item. Again, unless you all have a good reason for this that I'm just totally missing here. You know, the last time I asked you all to comment about something being useful was about the fire protection enchantment. Seeing as me making fun of this enchantment has become a bit of an in-joke on the channel, it's safe to say that I was not convinced. But does that mean fire protection is completely useless? No, even I can't stretch that one. Even if I do still think it's the worst true enchantment in the game, you can still get saved by having it on your armor. Plus, if you don't want it, you could always unenchant anything that has it, and since we're judging the item, that would not be useless. But there are two enchantments that can't be removed under any circumstance. Those are the two curses, being Curse of Vanishing and Curse of Binding. These are the two enchantments that are worse than fire protection as they are purely negative. Vanishing makes any item with it disappear when the user dies, and Binding makes any piece of wearable equipment unable to be removed until it breaks or the player dies. So it's safe to say that you almost never want any of these on any piece of equipment, which means the book versions of these two curses are pretty useless. Considering you can't even unenchant the book to get a normal book back, there's basically no good reason to ever use these. But there are evil reasons. If you're playing in multiplayer, you could use the Curse of Binding enchantment on a pumpkin, and by having your friend walk over a dispenser, you can permanently attach it to their head until they die.
The jack-o'-lantern.
This is particularly evil in worlds with keep inventory, since even after death, the pumpkin would still remain stuck there. Now, is it practical to do this? No, not really, but if you're a sick and twisted individual, this does count as a use. For Vanishing, that can also be helpful on multiplayer and PvP settings, as Vanishing would prevent anyone that kills you from stealing your gear. So yes, while incredibly niche, uses do exist for both of these two books in multiplayer. If you want to judge this useless question from a single player perspective though, I do think these books are a reasonable answer. However, if you squint really hard, you can still find a use for these books even in single player. If you want, you can totally prank a zombie by giving it a piece of binding gear so it can never swap equipment. How does it feel that you can't wear that diamond helmet, loser? I really need friends. Also, since these are books, they are some of the few items that can fill chiseled bookshelves. Since you could find the cursed books in structures, it is possible that you could pick one up and use them as a bookshelf filler instead of a normal, actually useful book. So I think for those reasons, the cursed books narrowly miss out on being the most useless items for me. While we're talking about items that could be the most useless if we limit our scope a bit, I want to bring up another one that I could see being a pretty fair answer. That would be the recovery compass. In hardcore mode. The whole point of this item is to lead players to where they last died, which can help a lot with recovering their items before they despawn. In hardcore mode though, if you die in the game, you die in real life. Since you only get one life in hardcore mode, there's no respawning to get back your gear, so yeah, that pretty clearly leaves the recovery compass without anything to do. Now obviously that is not the case in normal survival, as this could end up being quite helpful in a dire scenario, and since this video isn't just about hardcore, I'm not going to count this. If this video was though, that would be a totally understandable choice. For another sort of handheld item, I want to take a look at the clock. This is a pretty infamous useless item, but it's for a pretty unique reason. It's one of Minecraft's oldest features, and as the name suggests, it's used to tell the time. Now part of the reason that's useless is because you can literally just use your eyes. But what if you hate touching grass and sunlight and can't see the sky? Well then you could use the clock to tell the time, I guess, but there's also not really anything stopping you from just digging up. If you ever need to know the time, it's almost always because you want to be or already are on the surface. In fact, to make clocks even worse, in older versions of the game, you could put the items required to craft it in the table and it would tell you the time. From there, you could just not craft the clock and move on with your day. So while the clock may be in the running for most useless item in older versions, I do think nowadays it's a lot better, relatively speaking. For one, the crafting exploit has been removed, so you actually have to make it to see the time. I totally knew that before writing the script and definitely didn't have to rewrite this entire segment. Never mind again, this exploit still works in Bedrock Edition. I'm gonna lose my mind. Guess it's a good thing we got Bedrock Edition's weird parody out of the way so it won't have to come back again. Clocks are also some of the best items to put in item frames for decoration. Any sort of clock-based furniture can be improved significantly by using the actual item. Clocks can also be found in both shipwrecks and ruined portal chests, so there are times where you could get it before the materials needed to craft it. Finally, clocks can also be used to distract piglins, so if you want, you can use them to make an expert getaway. But what if instead of running, you actually wanted to fight? Well, bows and arrows are pretty good for that, and oh my, that's a lot of arrows. Tipped arrows are a very strange set of items in the game that I almost never see anyone use. Essentially, they let you mix any of the game's potions with an arrow, affecting anything that gets hit by them. Now, these will always last much less time than their potion counterparts, but they do have a decent amount of advantages. The obvious one is that they can affect things from much farther away, which can be quite helpful in certain combat scenarios. Since it only takes one lingering potion to make 8 arrows, these can also be used to possibly affect more targets over a longer stretch of time. Tipped arrows can also be obtained from fletchers without the potion, which means if you really need that effect but for some reason can't get the potion materials, this is another feasible method. Finally, what might be their most helpful use is combining them with piercing. While arrows don't work with the infinity enchantment, they do work with piercing. So what you can do is shoot a mob to give them the effect and then pick the arrow back up again, essentially giving you infinite application of that potion effect. For example, that could maybe be helpful in villager trading halls that require you to cure them a lot, so you could save on making a ton of weakness potions. So as a whole, tipped arrows are not useless, but some of the effects are really weird to be put on arrows. Obviously, all of the negative effects make perfect sense for a combat setting, but what about the positive potions? Like, what could you possibly gain from making your target invisible? Well, I think now is when this video's niche scenarios start to get really niche. The best I can come up with for most of these has to do with the infinite application ability. In multiplayer, you and your friend could come equipped with piercing crossbows to constantly affect each other, or in single player, you could just shoot yourself. Yeah, that's a lot more annoying than using a normal potion, but since this does let you use it infinite times, that can be seen as useful. Since you can also get these arrows without the potions, shooting yourself could also be the only way for you to get some of these effects if you don't have the resources for the potions. With all that said though, there are some arrows that stand out as still being quite useless. Those are the arrows of healing and arrows of regeneration. Since they're arrows, they do still damage their target, so the effect kind of clashes with the arrow's normal use. It's a bit hard to get an exact measure for how much health you gain or lose from each of them, but it's important to note that the damage is calculated first, so if you try to shoot something low on health to save them, honestly, it's looking pretty bad for these two arrow types, but there is a saving grace. Undead mobs actually receive damage from instant health potions, which means these arrows could kill them more effectively than normal arrows. That is not the case though for the regen arrow. It's a pretty popular misconception that undead mobs will take poison damage from regeneration, when that's actually not the case. So in all honesty, if you wanted to say that arrows of regeneration are the most useless items in the game, that is pretty understandable. There are two absurdly niche uses I was able to come up with though. For one, since you can get these without the potion from fletchers, it could help you get the regen effect for the all potion advancements if you can't find a ghast. Secondly, since villagers can actually equip armor, which is really weird since you can't see it, you can shoot them with these arrows and heal more damage than you deal. So with piercing, you can infinitely regenerate the health of your villagers without making new potions. This also goes for wolves and wolf armor, though it's a lot easier to just give them meat. Now, were those great uses? No, but they are at least something, and that does prevent this from being the most useless item in the game. We are getting a lot closer now to my actual choice, but before I reveal what it was, I want to do a quick rapid fire round. Before scripting this video, I decided to ask the insane people on my community tab if they had any item ideas of their own, and while my list of items remained unchanged, a lot of people did comment about what I already included. There were also a few that said new ideas that I feel like aren't really that useless, so we're just gonna run through some of them really quickly here. For some reason, a lot of people said popped chorus fruit, which I don't really understand. Yeah, it's sometimes easier to get purple blocks from end cities, but popped chorus fruit makes it renewable and probably faster on a super large scale with farms. Some people mentioned beetroots, and while I personally never plant them, they can be eaten and used to craft red dye. Some others mentioned rabbit stew because eating it gives less hunger than the ingredients needed to make it. Honestly, this one is a lot more fair, but it is another requirement for the balanced diet advancement, and while it doesn't give as much hunger as its ingredients combined, it does save a slight bit of time while eating. So there might be a scenario where you need to get to full hunger fast, which rabbit stew would do better than the ingredients separated. Furnace minecarts are another pretty infamous useless item, but I have gotten comments before about them being helpful when moving mobs. I haven't personally done that, but since some people have, I guess that qualifies as a use. So with all that finally said, what do I think is Minecraft's most useless item? The mundane and thick potions. Many people don't do a lot of brewing in this game, so it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of you haven't even heard of these items. These essentially act as punishments for being a stupid dumb idiot and messing up while brewing. For a majority of potions in the game, you first need to put in netherwort to make an awkward potion, which can then be turned into the other types with other ingredients. If you instead skip the netherwort and put the other ingredient in first, you'll get either a Mundane or Thick potion. These can't be turned into any other potion, and if drank, they literally have zero effect. That means they're basically just more expensive water bottles. But they're actually even more useless. Not only can water bottles still be turned into other potions, they can also make mud out of dirt, and if turned into splash potions, put out fire and damage mobs like blazes, endermen, and snow golems. Mundane and Thick potions can't do any of that, so there's genuinely nothing you can do with these guys that water bottles can't already do. Sure, you can use these as projectiles to hit target blocks, but there's literally no reason to do that instead of just using a water bottle. I guess if you need to hit a target that's next to fire while also not putting that fire out, but literally, why would you ever need to do that? Since there's no way to get a Mundane or Thick potion without a water bottle first, there's no scenario where you're saving resources by using them instead. These also have the exact same texture as water bottles too, which means even as decoration in item frames and shelves, these are totally worthless. While they are also some of the few items that can fill brewing stands for decoration, again, water bottles are better for that. So with Mundane and Thick potions as my candidates, how do I whittle it down from here? The only difference between the two is how you make them. Mundane potions can be made from redstone, breeze rods, stone, slime blocks, cobwebs, magma cream, rabbit's foot, sugar, glistering melons, spider eyes, gas tears, or blaze powder. Thick potions, on the other hand, can only be made from glowstone dust. You could honestly go either way on which one you think is worse, but from that list, glowstone dust is definitely rarer than stuff like sugar, so I think the Thick potion takes the crown. Now from here, we can get even more specific. There are 4 different items that relate to every potion in the game, so which of these 4 do I think is the most useless? The bottle version we can strike off since we can drink that and get a normal bottle back, which some psycho could then use to make something actually useful. While the other 3 do technically have uses, I would accept any of them as the answer. The Thick splash potion can be turned into a lingering Thick potion, but since that's also practically useless, that's not really affecting anything. The lingering Thick potion can be crafted into tipped arrows, but again, the same reasoning applies. The tipped arrows can be used in combat, but are literally just worse than normal arrows. They require arrows to craft, and the only benefit you get from having this potion effect is that they no longer work with the infinity enchantment. Oh, and they're blue, I guess.
Why are you blue?
You can also get that blue effect from arrows of splashing though, which are just made from water bottles. Plus, those do actually deal half a heart of extra damage to blazes and snow golems. So of these 3, you really can pick any of them since all they can do is make each other or be worse than the ingredients that made them. But for me, I'm gonna go with the Thick tipped arrow due to it being the most expensive thing in the chain and being definitively worse than a normal arrow due to the infinity limitation. I mean, this item is so bad they didn't even give it its own thick name. It's literally just called tipped arrows. So I think it's pretty safe to say that from a usefulness and practicality standpoint, the Thick tipped arrow is the worst item in Minecraft. At least, that's what I wish I could say. Somehow, this journey isn't over yet. I mentioned earlier that I made a community post asking for items, and while it is still true that my personal useless list did an update, one comment did force me to change my conclusion. Gene Gerald 925 had a couple ideas of their own. While luck arrows don't count for this list, and some insane individuals could build within an ancient city to take advantage of reinforced deep slate, they did also mention Thick and Mundane potions in their comment. However, they mentioned something a little odd. They said that both of these can be used to make weakness potions. This left me a bit confused because I had never heard of this before. Now, I was playing Mario Galaxy 2 at the time, wasting 20 minutes of my life trying to find one specific green star, so I was kinda low on patience. I still wanted to test this though, so instead of opening Java, I decided to open Bedrock Edition since it opens faster. To my horror, I found that they were right. These can be used to make weakness potions, which is kind of a use. Now that definitely made me panic a bit, so I decided to go to the wiki. While I was there, I found out the horrible truth. These items work differently between the 2 versions. The reason I never heard of making weakness potions out of these 2 is because on the Java edition, you can't. So everything I said in my conclusion is accurate to Java, but on Bedrock edition, it's a whole different story. Not only can these be made into weakness potions, but the splash versions also act more like water bottles as they can damage blazes, endermen, and snow golems. Notably though, they still can't put out fires. Not really sure why. But you know what? I guess that doesn't matter anyway, since I chose the tipped arrows as my answer, and you can't change the effect on a tipped arrow once it's crafted. But Thick and Mundane arrows don't exist on this version. Yeah, so it turns out that my answer is a Java Edition exclusive, which means it can't be my answer for Bedrock. Normally I do my videos from the perspective of a Java player anyway, but I felt like I needed some sort of resolution for this problem. Thick-tipped arrows are still my answer for Java, so we just need a different answer for Bedrock. Honestly, I think a Lingering Thick potion does still qualify, though not quite as strongly. It is still technically a more expensive water bottle, since water bottles can also be turned directly into weakness potions. It does suck that there's no way to make it permanently useless now, but I guess that just puts it on the same tier as a drinkable thick potion. There is also a new Bedrock exclusive long mundane potion, but sadly it's creative mode exclusive and thus ineligible for this video. So for Bedrock, my conclusion comes down to two different items. The thick lingering potion still makes sense with it being a worse lingering water bottle, but my other option is the arrow of regeneration. That's because both of the niche uses I came up with it for Java have been removed in Bedrock. Villagers can't wear armor in this version, so any shot with the crossbow might deal more damage than the villager gains. The potion advancements also don't exist on this version either, so there is no reason to go out of your way just to get the regen effect. You could theoretically heal someone from a long distance, assuming they are wearing armor, but the amount of regen is so tiny that I think it's fair to call this niche enough to be practically useless. Of the two, I honestly think tipped arrows of regeneration may be worse, because at least the lingering thick potion can be turned into something useful, even if it was a really inefficient way to reach that result. So for my final answers, for the most useless items in Minecraft, I'm gonna have to go with the thick tipped arrow in Java Edition and the arrow of regeneration in Bedrock Edition. But anyways, that's it for this video. Do you hate orange glazed terracotta and hate me for not calling it useless? Let me know in the comments. This was a really fun video to script out and put together. Definitely a lot different than what I normally do, but hopefully you all liked it too. If you all have any more ideas similar to this, I'd love to do another video like this in the future as well. But before I go, I've got to thank my members, being Rich229, Maidzio2, Jihojim, Linhard von Hevering, Fredbear's Diner, Magnus and Larslot, Trifector, Tibby, King Drybones, Mario Master 101, Hippopotamus, Levi Strux, Nuclear, Cassie Channel, Blessed Tiger, Wyatt Derpy, Yanni the Duck, Trader Mo, Mevins 2001, Enchanted Skull, SMA, B Major 2003, Sir Musty, Belandor, Cinder CC, Jade Avery, Pronto Clone, Thicky Reiki, Ingenio TM, CW McCain, Tesseract, JubeTube, Jameson Pageson, Z Frost, Suffy Ant, Conkinut, Keep, and Christian Flattery Sequel Edition. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.